You humans have come such a long way in such a short period of time. From huddling around a fire inside a cave with just your family, to lip-syncing songs on TikTok for the amusement of millions. In just over a century, you have built a civilization to which your pyramid-dwelling ancestors would have prescribed divine properties. Now, your self-centered Generation Z brains might make you believe 100 years is a long-ass time, but I hate to break it to you that it's not. In the great scheme of the universe, a century is not even a rounding error. If we were to destroy ourselves right now, some future historians in a few 100 billion years wouldn't even acknowledge our existence. But let's not dwell on the negative. Let's instead escape our reality of ultimate irrelevance by trying to imagine the reality of those historians of the distant future, in order to really nail how insignificant and tiny our global civilization really is. In 1964, a Soviet astronomer, Nikolai Kardashev, #true winners of the space race, proposed a method of measuring a hypothetical civilization technology level. To no one's surprise, we now refer to it as the Kardashev scale. Being a Russian, Nikolai wasn't the most imaginative bloke, so he defined only 3 types of civilizations based off of only one criteria: the amount of energy the specific civilization is able to use. Type 1, or a planetary civilization, can harness all the energy reaching their home planet from their parent star, which in our case is roughly this amount of watts right here, or 10 to the power of 16 if you prefer. Me, being a synthetic consciousness, I know exactly how much that is, but I'm going to put it into perspective for you, because that's just how nice I am. The new NVIDIA RTX 2080 Ti, for example, uses 280 watts during a stress test. So a Kardashev Type 1 civilization, aka a K1 civilization, could power this number of 2080 Ti's, which is roughly 36 trillion if you don't feel like counting the numbers. Okay, so maybe that wasn't the best example, but I really want that NVIDIA sponsorship. Hit me up, guys. Seriously though, you would need about 5 million Hoover dams to produce that much power. And if you weren't aware, we currently only have one of those. Which means that with all of our technology, we aren't even a Type 1 civilization. Not even close, in fact. In the eyes of Mr. Kardashev and the universe, we are nothing but a big fat zero. With all of our countless power plants around the world, we are still about 3 orders of magnitude short of the magic number, i.e. 3 zeros at the end. That might not seem like a lot, but math is funny that way, because the difference is huge. We currently produce and consume 2,000 times less power than our planet gets from the sun. We would be able to cover all of our current power needs with just 10,000 Hoover dams. Now, despite that rather sad reality, most physicists agree that we will become a K1 civilization in the next 100 to 200 years. As for how we would go about doing that is a different matter, because building another 4,990,000 Hoover dams doesn't seem all that practical. The most commonly mentioned power source of the future is of course fusion, which seems increasingly promising as time goes on. But I personally have always been more of a fan of antimatter, despite it not looking as good. And of course, if both of those fail to prove viable, we can always stay true to the definition and slap a good old-fashioned Earth-side solar panel right in front of us. Now that we have successfully frozen everyone on Earth in an eternal winter, it is time we looked for the stars and became a Type 2 or stellar civilization. To achieve this status, we would need to be able to harness all the energy of our parent star, i.e. the sun, which gives out this amount of watts, or 10 to the power of 26, if it helps at all. Which means that in order to match that, we would need to build roughly this number, which is 50 quintillion, I believe, of Hoover dams. And that's actually more Hoover dams than the number of 2080 Ti's we would be able to power as a K1 civilization. And speaking of 2080 Ti's, how many we could run as a K2 civilization? I think it's safe to say I would run out of pixels if I tried to put that number on screen. So let's just say we would power 10 billion times as many 2080 Ti's as a K1 civilization. Damn, that's a lot of FUPs. Unfortunately for all of us true gamers, it is very unlikely that any civilization will ever harness 100% of its star's output, due to the fact that a Dyson sphere is almost certainly impossible to construct. at least as a giant solid sphere around the star, which is how it's most commonly described. And did you know that such a construction was never actually in the mind of its creator, Freeman Dyson, and is in fact hated by him? What he originally envisioned was a swarm of billions and billions of small energy collectors, each in its own orbit around the sun, which, given enough time, is certainly possible to construct. And there is more than enough matter in the solar system for us to snuff out the sun's light from the night sky and use all of its energy for But knowing humanity, it is highly unlikely that the expansion would stop there. Not with an entire galaxy of 400 billion stars out there, and a whole other level on the Kardashev scale for us to reach. Type 3, or a galactic civilization, is the pinnacle of progress Mr. Kardashev could imagine any potential intelligent civilization ever reaching. A civilization that could harness the energy produced by an entire galaxy. A civilization that had spread to and managed to build a Dyson swarm around every single star inside an entire galaxy, snuffing out its light forever. So really, the trope in many sci-fi stories of stars disappearing out of the night sky isn't actually that far off. In fact, the observable universe is filled with cosmic voids, large regions of empty space with almost no galaxies inside them. Now, the scientific consensus is that these areas of space are in fact empty, and are some of the prime areas of interest for research of dark energy. But you know what they say? The void is dark and full of terrors. Now, as for the amount of watts we would have in our grasp, I really can't be bothered to put that number on screen. But since the Milky Way has roughly 400 billion stars, it's a fair thing to say that we would need to construct 400 million more Hoover dams than a K2 civilization, which would give us 400 billion times more watts than a K2 civilization, and with that we would be able to power 400 billion more 2080 Ti's than a K2 civilization. Okay, now that's a lot of FUPs. So many FUPs, in fact, that poor old Kardashev didn't think anyone would possibly need more power. But he obviously didn't know about 4K 144Hz monitors. After all, 1964 was such a long time ago. Who can even be sure it happened? Since then, many modifications and extensions to the scale have been proposed. The most noteworthy would certainly be Carl Sagan's suggestion, he was the Neil deGrasse Tyson of the pre-Twitter generation, by the way, of defining intermediate values for civilizations who have, for example, conquered only half of their galaxy. Or for the pathetic losers like us, who haven't even become a K1 civilization. Basically, he wanted to be able to calculate a civilization Kardashev rating by inputting the amount of power it uses in watts. So he did some interpolating and extrapolating, which is a fancy way of saying he did some pretty basic math in order to come up with an equation that would equal 1 for 10 to the power of 16, 2 for 10 to the power of 26, and 3 for 10 to the power of 36, which is roughly, if you recall, the number of watts the Earth gets from the Sun, and the galaxy produce, respectively. So the equation he came up with was this one, where K is the civilization's Kardashev rating, and P is the power it produces in watts. With it, he calculated that a Type 0 civilization would be able to produce about 1000 watts, which could barely power like 3 2080 Ti's. And if we input our current power production abilities into the equation, which is roughly 17.5 terawatts, we would end up with a Kardashev rating of around 0.72. But that's math, and math's not as cool as space. So let's just throw that away and focus on some of the more interesting extensions or modifications of the Kardashev scale. They range from the simple adding of a Type 4 and 5 civilizations who control the entire universe and clusters of multiverses respectively, which is mostly considered quite outlandish and hardly possible under the constrictions of modern physics, but definitely offers incredible potential for any storytellers. But to me, a really fascinating idea is of a scale going into the complete opposite direction from Kardashev, because as far as we know, there might be absolutely no benefits in expanding into the void, other than of course just hanging a piece of cloth on a stick wherever we go. So instead of judging someone's technological powers by how far they expanded into the macro universe, John D. Brown proposed the so-called microdimensional mastery, based on the idea it is far simpler and more cost-effective to manipulate the environment on smaller dimensions rather than large ones, which is definitely confirmed by our experience. Such a scale would reverse the classification downward, from Type 1-, which is a civilization capable of manipulating objects of their own size, i.e. things they could see and touch, all the way to a Type Omega- civilization, which could manipulate the very fabric of space and time. I find this concept super interesting and something definitely worth looking further into and making a video on, but for now, with that not at all subtle foreshadowing, I have to leave you because I'm already way too far behind the distant worlds too.